Zyra Hale and Callum Vex once had what seemed like the perfect marriage, until one devastating night revealed just how dangerous love could become. What started as a secret affair spiraled into a violent explosion of rage, destruction, and lies, so twisted that the truth nearly vanished beneath Zyra's deception. But as the walls of their home shook with chaos and the police arrived to find her playing the victim, one question remained. Would Callum be the one to pay the price for her madness, or would justice finally catch up to Zyra before it was too late? Zyra Langston and Callum Reeves were the couple everyone admired. They had been together for nearly a decade, building a life that seemed picture perfect. Callum worked as a dedicated trauma nurse, pulling long shifts at the hospital, while Zyra ran a successful online boutique from home. Their spacious suburban house, with its manicured lawn and expensive decor, symbolized their hard-earned success. Friends envied their bond, calling them an unbreakable pair. But beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form. Cracks that Callum never noticed until it was too late. Zyra had grown restless. The spark that once defined their relationship had dimmed, and routine had taken its place. She longed for excitement, the rush of unpredictability, the thrill of feeling wanted in a way she hadn't in years. At first, it was harmless daydreaming, flirting, with the idea of something new, something dangerous. But daydreams soon turned into action when she met Dorian Vex, a charismatic bartender with a smirk that made her forget the life she had built. It started with casual conversations at the bar, when she stopped in for a drink after running errands. Dorian had a way of making her feel like the most important person in the room. His deep voice, smooth confidence, and the way he leaned in when he spoke made her crave his attention. The first time he touched her hand, something inside her shifted. She knew it was wrong, but the exhilaration was too powerful to resist. What began as innocent flirting quickly escalated. Zyra started making excuses to see him more often. She told Callum she had joined a book club, started taking late-night yoga classes, or needed to meet with clients. In reality, she was slipping into dimly lit lounges, whispering secrets over expensive cocktails, and finding herself in places she never thought she would go. Dorian made her feel alive, like she was part of a story more exciting than her own. At first, she was careful. She covered her tracks, paid for hotel rooms in cash, and made sure to erase every trace of their encounters. But the deeper she fell, the more reckless she became. She left perfume-scented scarves in her car, came home wearing lipstick that wasn't smudged from dinner, and started ignoring Callum's texts while she was out. It was as if she wanted to get caught, as if she needed an excuse for everything to fall apart. Callum wasn't the suspicious type, but he wasn't blind either. He started noticing small details, unexplained charges on their credit card, Zyra's sudden obsession with looking perfect every time she left the house, the way she avoided his touch. When he asked her about it, she dismissed his concerns, with a laugh, accusing him of overthinking things. But something didn't sit right with him. He started paying attention to her patterns, noticing how her stories didn't always add up. One night, as she claimed to be at a late-night business meeting, he decided to check her location through the family's shared phone plan. His stomach twisted when he saw that she was nowhere near the boutique district, but instead at a lounge across town. That night, Callum barely slept. He told himself it was a misunderstanding, that there had to be a logical explanation. But the unease gnawed at him, refusing to let go. The following evening, he made a decision that would change everything. He would follow her, see for himself whether his fears were real or just paranoia. As he parked outside the upscale lounge, his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Through the large glass windows, he spotted Zyra immediately. She wasn't alone. Dorian sat beside her, his arm draped casually over the back of her chair. Callum's pulse pounded as he watched his wife lean in, laughing at something Dorian said, her fingers brushing over his wrist in an intimate gesture. The moment was brief, but it was enough. Callum felt something inside him break. He had his answer. Zyra wasn't just distant, she was gone. Callum sat in his car, frozen in disbelief. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Zyra wasn't just being friendly, she was fully immersed in the moment, laughing, touching, and leaning into Dorian with a familiarity that could only mean one thing. The way she looked at him, the way her body naturally gravitated toward him, was something Callum hadn't seen in years. It was the kind of attention she used to give him, back when their love was fresh and full of promise. Now, she was giving it to someone else. His stomach twisted as he watched Dorian brush a strand of hair from Zyra's face, his fingers grazing her skin like it was something he had done 100 times before. Zyra didn't flinch or pull away. She smiled, tilting her head just slightly, silently inviting more. The sight made Callum's breath hitch. It was undeniable. She wasn't just flirting, she was his. The realization sent a sharp pain through his chest, a mixture of betrayal and humiliation. This wasn't some meaningless mistake. It was deliberate. It was real. Callum could barely feel his hands as he reached for his phone. He wanted proof, something tangible to confront her with. His fingers trembled as he opened the camera and snapped a few photos through the windshield. Every image was another nail in the coffin of his marriage. His wife, smiling, glowing, completely at ease with another man. For a moment, he considered storming inside, causing a scene, demanding answers right then and there. But the weight of what he had just witnessed made him pause. There was no need for theatrics. The evidence spoke for itself. If he confronted her in public, she would lie, twist the truth, make him look like the irrational one. No, he needed to handle this differently. He needed to let her think she was still in control. Callum drove home in a daze. His mind replayed every moment from the past few months, every excuse she had made, every time she had dismissed his concerns. He saw it all clearly now. The nights she came home late, claiming she was working on a new business launch, the unexplained receipts for expensive dinners, ones she insisted were for client meetings, the coldness in her touch, the way she barely looked at him anymore. He had been so blind. By the time he pulled into the driveway, his entire body ached with exhaustion, but he wasn't done yet. He went inside, setting up everything he needed, the receipts, the messages she had sent him with contradicting details, and now the photos. He gathered it all, making sure he was ready for the confrontation. He wouldn't let her gaslight him into thinking he was imagining things. Hours passed before he finally heard the garage door open. Zyra walked in, looking refreshed. Her lips painted a shade of red that wasn't there when she left. She barely glanced at him before heading toward the kitchen. That was the final insult. No guilt, no hesitation. Just another normal night for her. Callum's voice was steady when he called her name. She turned, an annoyed expression flickering across her face before shifting into something softer. She was good at this, good at pretending, but not good enough. When he laid everything out in front of her, the receipts, the inconsistencies, and finally, the photos, her expression didn't crumble the way he expected. There was no stammering, no desperate attempt to deny it. Instead, she stared at him, her eyes narrowing as if he had done something wrong. Then she laughed. A cold, humorless sound. The shift in her demeanor sent a chill through him. Instead of remorse or even anger, there was something else in her eyes. Something dangerous. Callum suddenly realized that exposing her was just the beginning. He had no idea what was coming next. Zyra's laugh echoed through the room, sharp and mocking. She didn't seem ashamed or guilty. She seemed amused. Callum had expected a reaction, but not this. He had prepared for anger, for tears, for denial, but not for complete indifference. The way she looked at him, with a smirk curling at the edges of her lips, sent a chill through his spine. It was as if she was daring him to push further, to see what she was truly capable of. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Callum's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. He had spent hours gathering proof, anticipating the moment she would break down and admit to her betrayal. But Zyra wasn't breaking. She was thriving. The realization made his stomach churn. Then, without warning, she lunged. The impact caught him off guard as her hands shoved against his chest with surprising force. Callum stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the dining table. Before he could react, she grabbed the nearest object, a glass vase, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards flying in all directions. His first instinct was to calm her down, to stop whatever madness had taken hold of her. But Zyra wasn't looking for resolution. She wanted destruction. Her breathing was erratic, her pupils dilated with rage. She grabbed framed photos from the shelf and sent them crashing to the ground. The glass splintered beneath her heels as she moved through the room like a storm, knocking over chairs, yanking books off the coffee table, flinging anything within reach. Callum barely had time to dodge as a heavy candle holder flew past his head, slamming against the wall behind him. His heart pounded. He had never seen her like this. The woman he married, the woman he thought he knew, was gone. What remained was something unrecognizable, something violent and unpredictable. She was screaming now, a string of accusations pouring from her lips. It wasn't about her infidelity anymore. It was about him, about how he had failed her, about how he had pushed her to this. She twisted the blame with ease, turning herself into the victim and him into the villain. Every word dripped with venom, each sentence designed to cut deeper than the last. Then she turned on him. Her nails clawed at his arm, leaving deep red marks as she shoved him with all her strength. Callum's back hit the wall, his head spinning. He barely had time to react before she slapped him across the face, the sting spreading through his cheek like fire. He tasted blood. Callum's body screamed at him to fight back, to push her away, to make her stop. But he couldn't. No matter how much she hurt him, he couldn't bring himself to lay a hand on her. He had never been the type to meet violence with violence. He just wanted it to end. Zyra, on the other hand, had no intention of stopping. She yanked a lamp from the side table and threw it to the ground, watching with satisfaction as it shattered into pieces. She kicked over the coffee table, sending magazines flying. Her rage was limitless, her destruction methodical. Callum knew he had to get out. He ducked past her, moving quickly toward the bedroom, locking the door behind him. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. He hesitated for only a moment before dialing. Zyra continued to scream on the other side of the door, her fists pounding against it. But it didn't matter anymore. Help was on the way. What terrified him the most wasn't what she had already done. It was what she would do next. The pounding on the door didn't stop. Zyra's fists slammed against the wood with an unrelenting fury, each blow vibrating through the room. Callum stood frozen, his phone still gripped in his trembling hand. He had made the call. Help was coming. But how long would it take? How much damage could she do before they arrived? He could hear her pacing outside the door, breathing heavily, muttering to herself. Then, silence. A thick, unnatural stillness settled over the house, making the air feel heavier. Callum's pulse pounded in his ears. He didn't trust the quiet. Zyra wasn't the type to give up so easily. Then, the sound of shattering glass. Callum's stomach dropped as he realized what she was doing. She had moved to the living room, taking her destruction even further. More crashes followed. A mirror, a lamp, a chair toppling over. Every noise felt like a warning, a reminder that she was spiraling further out of control. Then, something worse. The sound of drawers being yanked open, objects clattering onto the floor. Callum knew exactly what she was looking for. His mind raced. There was a kitchen knife set in one of those drawers, sharp enough to cut through bone. If she got her hands on one, there was no telling what she might do. Callum swallowed hard. He needed to act before things escalated beyond repair. Slowly, he unlocked the bedroom door and cracked it open just enough to see into the hallway. Zyra's back was turned to him, her hair wild, her body hunched over the kitchen counter as she rifled through the drawers. Then she found it. The gleam of stainless steel caught the dim light as she lifted the largest knife. Gripping it tightly in her hand, she turned it over, studying the blade, her breathing ragged. Callum's body went cold. He had never been afraid of Zyra before, but this was different. She was no longer just angry. She was unpredictable, dangerous. Before he could think of his next move, she spun around, her wild eyes locking onto him. A slow, twisted smile spread across her lips. She lifted the knife, tapping the blade against her palm as if considering her options. Callum took a step back, his heart racing. He knew reasoning with her was pointless. She was past the point of logic. He needed to keep her distracted until help arrived. Zyra took a step forward, her fingers tightening around the handle. Her expression was unreadable, a strange mix of amusement and something darker. She tilted her head, as if trying to decide what to do next. Then, the sound of sirens. Zyra's entire body stiffened. The distant wail of approaching police cars shattered the moment, pulling her out of whatever twisted fantasy she had been lost in. Her eyes darted toward the front door, her mind racing. In an instant, she dropped the knife and ran toward the living room. Callum barely had time to process what she was doing before he heard it, the sound of her own screams. By the time the police arrived, Zyra was curled up on the floor, clutching her arm as if she had been injured. Her cries filled the house, frantic and desperate. She gasped for air between sobs, pointing toward Callum as the officers stepped inside. "He hit me! He attacked me!" she wailed. Callum's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't just trying to play the victim. She was setting him up. She was willing to destroy him completely. The officers glanced between them, assessing the scene. Shattered glass, overturned furniture, a house in complete disarray. And then there was Zyra, crying, trembling, looking like the perfect victim. Callum knew he was in trouble, but he also knew the truth. The question was, would they believe him? The officers moved quickly, separating them as Zyra continued to sob, clutching at her arm as if it were broken. Her performance was flawless, shaking breaths, quivering lips, wide, fearful eyes darting toward Callum as if she expected him to strike her again. Callum had seen her manipulate people before, twist the truth to suit her needs, but never like this. Never so convincingly. One officer guided Zyra toward the couch, speaking to her in a low, reassuring tone. Another turned to Callum, his expression unreadable. "Sir, we need you to step outside." Callum swallowed hard, his pulse racing. He wanted to argue, to point to the destruction around them, to tell them to check the marks she had left on him. But he knew how this worked. The moment someone claimed to be the victim, especially with tears in their eyes, the accused was immediately on the defensive. As he stepped out onto the porch, the cold night air hit his skin like a slap. A second police car pulled up, lights flashing against the darkened street. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some even stepping onto their porches, watching the commotion unfold. Minutes passed, dragging like hours. Inside, Zyra's voice rose and fell in dramatic waves as she recounted her version of the story. Callum could already imagine the lies pouring from her lips. How she had come home, only to be met with his rage. How she had tried to leave, but he had grabbed her. How she had barely escaped his violent outburst. She would paint herself as the terrified wife, the innocent woman caught in a nightmare. Then, the officer who had been speaking to Zyra stepped outside. His expression was more serious now, his eyes scanning Callum's face as if searching for any sign of guilt. "Sir, do you have any injuries?" Callum let out a slow breath, lifting his arms to show the red scratch marks running down his forearms. His cheek still burned where Zyra had struck him. His heart pounded as he took his chance to speak. "Check the security cameras." The officer's gaze flickered with something. Doubt. Consideration. Callum's house had cameras installed in the living room and kitchen. If they reviewed the footage, they would see everything. The rage in Zyra's eyes, the way she had torn through the house, how she had grabbed the knife, how she had attacked him. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner before nodding. They re-entered the house, leaving Callum standing in the cold. His stomach twisted as he imagined the scenario playing out inside. Zyra must have realized the cameras existed. Would she try to twist the narrative? Claim that the footage was tampered with? Then, the yelling started. Zyra's voice, rising. In panic, no longer the pitiful sobs of a victim, but the screeching protests of someone caught in a lie. Callum couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. She was losing control. Minutes later, the door opened again. This time, it was two officers leading Zyra out in handcuffs. Her face was a mess of smeared mascara and fury. She thrashed against their grip, shouting protests, screaming that Callum had set her up, that he was framing her. But the officers didn't listen. The truth had been caught on tape. As they shoved her into the back of the police car, Zyra locked eyes with Callum one last time. There was no remorse, no shame, only unfiltered hatred. Then, the door slammed shut, and she was gone. The house was a disaster. Shattered glass, overturned furniture, the remnants of a life he had once shared with the woman who had just tried to ruin him. Callum stood there, breathing deeply, trying to make sense of it all. He wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was clear. Zyra had destroyed everything, and now she would finally pay for it.